Welcome to the Ethereal Advisors Podcast, Terrell.
Thank you for having me.
Can you introduce yourself briefly before we start?
Yeah, so my full name Terrell Turner. If you're looking for me on social media, you'll probably find me as Terrell A. Turner.
Okay.
I'm a CPA by trade. Right now, I currently run an accounting firm, and we focus on bookkeeping, CFO, and advisory services for law firms as our target audience.
When you started your accounting firm, what was your thought and how did you grow? Like, how were the initial period of 5 years?
Yeah, so I mean, when I started the firm, the good thing that I did before I started is while I was still working, I had planned ahead of time and knew I wanted to start a firm. So I reached out to about, 7 CPAs in like my city. So I just went online and looked up for CPAs who had a firm in the area, like a small firm. And I reached out to them via email or on LinkedIn and said, hey, I'm thinking about starting a firm. Wanted to know if I could have 15 minutes of your time to ask you some questions. 5 out of 7 said yes, and we booked the time. And, some of them, that 15-minute conversation turned into a 2-hour conversation. And they gave me a lot of perspective and things to consider and things to think about. And so when I started the firm, I had a lot of perspective in mind. Like one of the biggest challenges is getting clients. And they were like, hey, showing up at events and stuff like that, shaking hands, meeting people. Well, by the time I left my full-time role, because I was wrapping up a final project, and I was like, I'm not going to leave that company before we got through the project because we were raising about 120 million in private equity funding. And so I'm like, I'm not going to leave in the middle of that. I'll wait until we get this, finished. And when I did that, the timing just happened to be March the 30th was when I left my full-time job. So April 1st was kind of the start of the pandemic where everything was shutting down. So a lot of the marketing strategies that everybody had told me about, going to events, shaking hands, and meeting people, like you couldn't do any of that
Yeah,
in
yeah,
April 1st of 2020.
yeah.
So for me, I think when I started my firm, my biggest thought was, hey, you're probably not going to get any clients within the first couple months. You need to just focus on getting your name out there so people know who you are because I mean, at that time, most companies were, well, the biggest thing in the news was that companies were cutting back. They were laying off people because they didn't know how to navigate the pandemic. So I just focused on, well, how do I just market and get my name out there? And that was my focus for year one. So I would say after doing that for 6 months of really just focus on getting my name out there, we landed our first client. That paid us $2,500 a month. And at that point, I was just like, man, this strategy is working. This is enough to sustain, what we're doing, a good start. And then we just continued doubling down on the marketing and we just kind of continued to grow from there.
Okay. So it took 6 months to get your first client.
Yeah. Yeah. So it took 6 months because I would say I had done some work for like a friend who had a restaurant, but that was someone I knew before. I don't necessarily count that as my first client, but like I always say is like this, the first time a stranger, agreed to pay
Yeah.
me, it was like 6 months.
Okay. And what did you do in that 6 months? Were you marketing or were you meeting people?
Yeah,
Or
so the way that I did it was I started a podcast and it was called the Business Talk Library. And what I would do is bring on small business owners. We would hop on Zoom and I would just have a conversation. We have a 30-minute conversation about their business and their story. And I would say within the first year, like I started, like I said, kind of April 1st. From April 1st to December, I think I had done 200 interviews during
oh my
that
God.
period of time. And a lot of my days were getting on LinkedIn, doing research, like who do I need to invite as a guest. And so there were certain points I would say I had an average of, hey, I need to find 50 new people every single week on LinkedIn that I didn't already know, reach out to them, start a conversation, because eventually some of that 50 would, want to be a guest on the podcast. And so every single week I was like, okay, my goal is to meet 50 new people that I didn't know last week. And I just kept doing that. And like I said, by the end of the year, we had filmed and released 200 episodes in my first year.
Interesting. 200 episodes in a year. That's massive. But that was a grinding period, right, for you, and that built a foundation later when the business pick up, right? So from that to now, where you are having 9 employees, you have grown 30% year on year. How was that journey from your first client to now? How have you grown?
Yeah, I think the big thing for me was, I think one is after you got that first client, you kind of have some confidence in what you're delivering. And to be honest, even with that first client, the level of work that I was doing for that client, I had severely underpriced my services for what I was providing, but I was just so happy to have a client that I was like, I'm just going to go above and beyond and do everything I can to help them, and which, they were grateful for it. But for me, I think year one to I would say year two was where I started to learn to strike that balance between, hey, when you get clients, this is very different from having a job, because when you have a job, you have one company you have to support. But when you're running a business, you're supporting multiple businesses. So it's, how do you take a step back to make sure that you're using your time wisely and spreading it between these clients? And so year two was me really figuring out, how do you really support multiple businesses at the same time, because we started adding on more customers. And I think I would say towards the end of year two is where we started to hit a capacity constraint, where I was like, this is too much work for me to do by myself. And so then it was, all right, going into year three was, all right, you got to start hiring. How do we start to figure out, how do you find people? And we started, I had interviewed. So what I did was, whenever I hit a hurdle or something that I didn't know, what I would do is I would go find someone who could be a guest on the show, who was good at that, bring them on the podcast as a guest, and then I could ask them all the questions that I had, during the podcast. And so I had brought someone on that was using, staffing in the Philippines. So I brought them on and I asked them all the questions during the show. And then at the end of the show, I was like, hey, I have some extra work, and does your team have extra capacity? And then we struck an agreement, and then his team was able to support the extra work that I did. And that's what started me getting comfortable, of hiring staff. And then after about 4 months, I hired my own employees, and started expanding that way. And I would just say, I think through the years, kind of, year three was getting used to hiring staff. Year four was, all right, me getting used to letting some stuff go. Because I think when you start hiring people, you got to kind of start to learn to let some stuff go. And how do you give your team the right structure and the right accountability so that they can be successful, but also at the same time, you can get out of the way and stop holding them back? And so we really started to scale and grow our team. And I became more of a CEO as opposed to someone trying to, work in every single detail of the company.
You hired from Philippines and not India, right? Outsourcing.
Mm-hmm.
Why? May I know?
Yeah, so I think with the Philippines, the reason why is because the person that I had on the show as a guest, they already had a team in the Philippines. And at the time, I wasn't sure of hey, if I was going to have enough cash flow to hire people. So when I struck the deal with him of just using, his team a couple hours a month, it was an easier transition for me to just use his team a couple hours a month, because I could support that. And since he already had a team in the Philippines, we just decided to expand, because to this day, we still use, some of the people on his team. We still use them as support for some of our clients, even though we have our own staff. And I think it's just the dynamics of it worked out very well. And then I think also for what the Philippines allowed us to do is it gave us a strategic marketing advantage, because we could then promise the client a faster time to delivery, because the team in the Philippines, the accounting team, works their day shift. So while I'm sleeping or while the client is sleeping, the work is being done. So if the client sends me a request today, then in the morning they can have their answer. And so when we figured out like, hey, that timing difference, because at first you think that the timing difference is going to be a problem. But for us, I looked at it and said, how do we turn this timing difference into an advantage? And we really started leaning heavy into that of just like, hey, this is an advantage, and really started expanding our team. And I will say is, even now that we kind of looked at, really taking our services to the next level, because I think the Philippines has been great for, the bookkeeping work. One of the things we're looking at is data analytics, and, we're open to looking at other markets, like other countries who may have staffing that could help us fill that data analytics service we want to go to market with for our clients.
Okay, we'll come back on the outsourcing part. So, while running the business, what were the challenges that you faced as an accounting professional? And because so many new CPAs who are just starting out do face that, and how did you overcome that? If you can just mention 3 to 5 major hurdles that you
Yeah,
faced.
yeah. I think the first hurdle is, I mean, just getting over the accounting ego is what I call it, because I do think accountants tend to explain things in a way that only accountants understand.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, I get it.
and I think that is, that's a huge hurdle for a lot of people, because when you're talking to a owner of a business who doesn't have an accounting background, and you're trying to explain something to them using technical accounting terms, they're not going to understand it. And so for me, it's like I had to recognize like, hey, me adjusting the way that I'm explaining things doesn't mean that I'm not a good accountant. It just means that I'm learning to be a better communicator. And so I think that was one of the hurdles I had to get over. And then I think also it's just figuring out marketing. I think marketing is a very challenging area for accountants, because I just think we never really spent time really understanding it. Like, we may know how much a marketing strategy may have cost, or we may look and see, man, the marketing or the sales department, they spend a lot of time, they spend a lot of money on marketing, but we never really develop an appreciation for it. Now, for me at the time, like, I just decided I was going to get good at it. Now, one of the things that I encourage a lot of accounting firms is like, there are a lot of organizations out there who can help you with your marketing. You don't necessarily have to learn every aspect of marketing. You just got to learn enough to give a good marketing company some guidance so they can actually help you. And so I think getting over the marketing hurdle, the next one was getting over the sales hurdle, because I do think sometimes people confuse and think that marketing and sales are the same thing. They are completely different. And I think that marketing is getting your message out there, is, building the interest and awareness in what you do and the value you can deliver. Sales is actually having the conversation that leads to closing the deal and put names on documents so that, hey, you have the deal in the books. And so I had to learn that process of sales, of like how to have that conversation, how to deal with when people say no, or when people say, well, maybe later. Because what I would see is some people would say, let me think about it. And then, 2 weeks later, they signed a contract with another company. And I'm like, man, it looks like they were ready to make a deal, but they didn't make a deal with us. And so I had to learn, okay, how do you figure out sales and get better at sales? And so that was like, hurdle number 3. And I'd say hurdle number 4 was really leadership, is how do you lead and guide a team? And I think especially when you have a remote team, it's how do you give that remote team enough structure and enough guidance and enough clarity that they can actually perform well? Because I was talking to a friend, and I told him, I was like, I think that U.S. businesses tend to severely underrate, I would say, offshore staff, because a lot of times people tend to think in the US, I hear a lot of these conversations where people say, you know, I'm not sure about hiring, staff offshore because you have security issues, and what about performance? And I would say is, you have those same issues here in the US. I'm like, I think it really comes down to your leadership. And fortunate for me, like, I had worked at Fortune 500 companies before where we had used offshore staff in India and Malaysia. So I had gone through the process before, and I know that if you give the right structure, the right clarity, and the right level of accountability, an offshore staff will perform just as good and sometimes even better than your domestic staff. And so, me figuring out, like, how do you create that structure within our organization to really, let our offshore staff to really maximize their performance. And so I would say that's probably the fourth hurdle, and we're still kind of navigating, really maximizing the offshore staff's, potential as we're kind of continuing to grow.
And have you thought about building a firm, like establishing your own firm in India or Philippines?
I've heard some people mention that. I haven't really fully explored that path yet, but I would say it's probably something where, we have on the radar over the next probably, 2 years, is really looking more closely into that, of what it would look like if we established, our firm in other countries to really help us, expand with our workforce even more.
When you talked about marketing, like, so you learned by yourself
Yes,
all the
a
marketing
lot of
techniques,
the
yeah.
yeah. Yep. I
And
mean, from reading books and YouTube and just trying some
okay,
stuff, seeing what worked and seeing what didn't.
same happened with me when I was pursuing my CA. So the work that we do is administrative work, right? But while doing it, what I got to know is I'm good at it, but somehow I was not enjoying it. Something was missing. And that missing piece was of creation. And that is how I got into marketing, because I wanted to create. I wanted to see if I create something that is there out in the world, whether it is business, whether it's a LinkedIn post, whether it's a YouTube video, because that is a creation, right? Because I have created that. And I never feel that when I was doing my CA. And that is how I cleared my CA, got into marketing, and again merged my accounting and marketing aspect to run this now.
Awesome. And I think that marketing is a very undervalued kind of skill set, and I call marketing is a bit of, it's a skill and an art. And because I think that creative reality is very, very present in marketing. Plus, there are some skills that are needed as well. And I think that a lot of time accountants don't really have a full appreciation for that art and skill that comes with marketing. Because if you don't have it, I mean, your organization is not going to do as well as it could
Yeah,
without
yeah.
a good marketing function.
You have grown year on year 30%, right? And if you compare yourself when you just started, there's a vast difference, right? And not many accounting professionals and CPAs are able to do that. So, what are the things that you did right that other people are not able to do it, and you have been able to mark on this successful journey?
I think the first thing for us was learning the lesson from year one. I would say year one and two, because year one and two, we had several restaurant clients, and that was the area we were growing in. And one of the things I quickly learned is when your clients have cash flow problems, that means you have cash flow problems. And so for me, I learned very early on is just because you have a client today doesn't mean that you're going to keep those clients forever. And, surprisingly, I talked to so many different, accounting firms, and I realized, like, they have no consistent ongoing effort to get new clients. It's almost like, we have the right number of clients. We're just going to stick with our current client. I'm like, some of those clients are going to leave.
Going,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
have, you have to keep a steady flow of, marketing to attract new clients, and then sales to bring new clients in. And so for me, one of the things that I looked at is like, hey, you are every year you may lose some clients. So you need to have a very active force of bringing more clients on. And you need to constantly be trying to attract new clients and to never stop that flow. And so for us, even as we've lost some clients, just the new clients that we brought on have allowed us to continue growing to where we've never had a year where we went backwards. And part of that just because I do have this perspective of like, hey, we should consistently be bringing on more clients and more clients, and we should be putting ourselves out there to make offers to more people. And then also, the other thing that I learned, and it took me maybe about 3 years to really wrap my mind around this, is you need to raise your prices. Because we were, at one point, we were probably, one of the lower end of pricing our services. And what I realized is like, man, we're working really, really hard to make the amount of money we were making. But I'm like, if we raised our prices, we could probably lose some clients, but still do well because we raised our prices. And so we started really looking at how do we right size our prices. And then because we were constantly looking for new clients, the new clients that were coming in would start at the new prices. And then we created a plan to start getting our existing or our legacy clients getting their pricing to upgrade, each year. And as we started doing that, we noticed by going after new customers constantly, and then by using a smart strategy of raising our prices strategically, that allowed us to continue growing. And then I think the other thing was just adding new services. Like, I mentioned earlier, like we're looking at adding, data analytics because we recognize like, hey, that's a complementary service to an accounting firm. We can do it. We have access to the data. And I think by offering clients something additional, it allows us to keep growing. And in that case, we can grow without even having to add new clients. All we need to do is just offer new valuable services. But we're going to continue doing all three. We're going to keep getting new clients. We're going to keep raising our prices wisely, and we're going to keep offering new services.
By data analytics, you mean providing financial insights based on their financials, right?
Yeah, so some of it is a combination of, providing insights based on the financials, but also bringing in their non-financial data, like bringing in their marketing data to be able to help them understand things like what's their cost of acquisition. And if I
Yeah,
know your
got it.
cost of acquisition, then, and I know because if I know what your revenue projections for the year are, I know what your average customer, contract is, I can then do the math back into you need X number of clients. And then if I know what your cost of acquisition is, I can then calculate here's about how much you need to spend on marketing. So then we can go back to our client's marketing company and say, hey, here's the cost of acquisition they need to target. How do we adjust the marketing plan to align with this? And so by doing data analytics, we can start to see that full picture of the process and provide them with more, better strategic insight. And I think that's probably going to be the next level of service is going beyond just, financial advisory and data analytics. Now is being able to provide you strategic insight about, your business, kind of more in the COO role of supporting our clients.
Yeah, I can get that. That mostly like focusing on business finance sides, because I've seen when I was in my previous organization, we used to sit with business finance and figure out what is the like max cost of acquisition that we need to have,
Mm-hmm.
and run down the numbers to figure out how many leads and we want to do so that that number is met. Interesting, but I never thought I would get that number from CPA. Yeah, that is really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, and we realize that. I mean, I think that accounting is definitely changing what people expect from their accountant because, I mean, the reality is when we talk to businesses, if it has a dollar sign attached to it, people assume that, hey, I should talk to my accountant about this. And we realize that more of the conversations I end up having with clients, it's more about kind of looking forward, thinking proactively. Like I had a call with a client yesterday, and one of the things we were talking about is, hey, their hiring plan. And we're talking about like, hey, they're looking to hire more staff, and hey, what should that person's target be once they get hired for this to financially make sense? And, historically, accountants have only focused on the past, like, hey, here's how you did. But to be able to have that hypothetical conversation and say, hey, because we know you're going to have to pay a recruiting fee, we should probably, let's negotiate to pay the recruiting fee, 30 in net 30-day terms. Let's get the person in, give us some time to get them to work. And hey, here's what some of the targets should be. And here's what some of the accountability and the onboarding plan should look like, to where you really start giving, a more well-rounded kind of business advisory once you start with the numbers. But the numbers, I think, open the door for you to understand so many other areas of the business. And I think it's a strategic opportunity that accountants should move into, because, I mean, as you think about things like AI, some of the stuff we've done historically in the accounting field, AI is going to be able to do it faster and more accurately.
True, true. Going back, how did you figure out that law is a niche that you want to focus on? How did you land it on that?
Yeah, so as I said, when we started off, I mean, restaurants was kind of like the focus area, and we were going into. And when I really looked at their kind of business cycle, and I realized like restaurants usually last about 5 years, and they often are very tight margins. So I'm like, I don't want to get in this habit of having to replace my clients every 5 years. So we started looking at other industries. And when I had done some consulting with a couple of law firms, and after about 17 law firms, I realized that their business model is very similar to an accounting firm. I understand how they operate. I understand, and I really respect the work that law firm owners do, because I was talking to a lot of law firms where, the lawyers are stepping into, their client's life at a probably a absolutely traumatic time. Like they just, got into a car accident and they're not sure if they're going to be able to walk again, or hey, they're going through a divorce. And I mean, that can be a very emotionally trying time. Or, you have someone who's, trying to adopt children, and they're jumping through the legal hurdles of that, or someone who's trying to protect the trademark for their business because they've worked for years as an entrepreneur. Now they want to protect their business that they've developed. And I think after seeing so much of that, like I greatly respect the work that the legal profession is actually doing to help their clients. And for me personally, I'm like, if we're going to support, and really pour our energy into supporting our clients, I think it's great to find an industry where you actually believe in the quality of the work that they do, plus all the other things, meaning the legal industry is very stable and the legal industry has pretty good margins, so they can afford to pay us, and they actually need our help. And so when I looked at all of those things, like there is compatibility on from a, like I say, a moral or an emotional standpoint. Like we appreciate the work that they do. They're a stable industry, so the legal industry is gonna be around for a while. They can afford to pay our services, and they need our help. And so when we looked at that and we looked at other industries, we were like, you know what? This is a really good industry to focus on. So we're going to focus our energy here, and we're going to move forward in this industry. So that's kind of how we came to settle on the legal industry.
Now coming back, coming on the side of advisory, like so, this was your journey. Now let's go think from an ENCPA perspective, who is just starting, who is in need of one client so that his business just starts. So how does he get his first client as a professional?
Yeah, so I would say for someone who's just starting and you're trying to get your first client, I would definitely say go to social media. And I mean, there are tons of businesses out there that you can kind of, look at. Like if you have an idea of what type of business you want to work with, it's just like look up their profile, see what they like, see what they talk about on social media, like on their profile. Because I think the more you can learn about, that industry, and you don't have to become an expert, and you can even use things like AI to help you learn more about that industry. It's gonna, it'll help you understand, like, do you even like that industry? And then two, when it is time for you to have conversations with people, I think it's going to really help you. And I think by starting with, social medias, you can message people like, let's say, for example, like you want to work with, let's say if you wanted to work with, floral shops or whatever, like people who put together flowers, is you can go online, look up all the floral shops in your area and just reach out to them and say, hey, I'm starting an accounting firm and I'm focusing on, floral shops and businesses in that sector, and looking to see, hey, do you know any floral shops that need an accountant? And I think by consistently putting yourself out there and letting people know what you do and who you do it for, you will find a client very quickly that way, as opposed to just kind of sitting back waiting for someone to call you.
Okay. And how can they create an USP uh, and differentiation? Because there are so many CPAs. Why would they take bet on a young guy? And even if they're taking
Yep.
it, what unique proposition would he have? He should have so that he can stand out.
Yeah, and I think that, this is a good topic because so many accounting firms, I think they are horrible at the unique, kind of proposition. And I think businesses in general are horrible at this. And I think there's some very awful advice that you hear on YouTube and different places. I've even gone to conferences where people talk about how do you create your unique position, and the advice they give, I'm like, that is horrible
Yeah,
advice,
yeah,
because
yeah.
a lot of times the advice that people give is, well, focus on you and what you do well. And I would say, do it the other way around. Figure out, like, okay, all right, who do you think you want to work with? Let's figure out what matters to them. Like I said, like, if let's say if you want to work with floral shops, or let's say you want to work with barbershops, go on social media and look up a couple of barbershops, figure out what's important to them, and then that's how you develop your offer based on what they care about. And I think when you can do that, immediately it makes you unique, because everyone else, well, I would say mostly everyone else is trying to do it the other way around. They sit in their room by themselves and they create these grand plans about, here's how we're going to be unique. And then they try to go force it down the throat of their potential customers. And their potential customers are like, I don't care about anything you just said. Like, but if you do some research on the potential clients first, and then you go bring them something, and I would say, as a very clear example for us, when it comes down to law firms, what makes us unique is not that we've created our accounting solutions in a vacuum. It's we looked at what they like to understand. And one of the things we realize is, for lawyers, a very, very common phrase that they use is they want to know their numbers. That is a very common phrase that they use. So instead of telling them, hey, we offer bookkeeping services to help you, we say, hey, we can help you know your numbers. Now, to an accountant, that means nothing. But to the audience that we're trying to speak to, that means everything to them. And so for them, they're like, well, they start telling their friends, hey, they're an accounting firm who can help you know your numbers. And I'm like, that's our unique position. And we didn't have to come up with anything special. We just had to pay attention to the audience and then translate what we do in terms of what they care about. And I think for anyone who's just starting out, is spend the time to study your audience and then talk like they talk. That alone will make you unique.
100%. Like, listening to your answer makes me clear that I'm getting this answer from a marketeer, because I've talked with the finance professionals, and I've talked with the finance professionals who knows marketing. Like, it's heads up. And this is what they are missing currently, to be honest. Everyone wants you to be authentic, but at last, it's not about being authentic. It's about speaking the voice same as your customer.
Absolutely. And I do think that, that's a very good point, because I had this conversation, and I know this is an unpopular opinion for some, is where everyone, I hear so many people talk about, oh, you want to be your authentic self. And I'm like, at the end of the day, your clients don't really care about your authentic self. They care about their authentic self. And I'm just like, you showing up as authentic. I mean, it would be kind of like, if I were going to, hire a doctor for a procedure, I really don't care about the doctor's authentic self. I
Yeah.
care about what I care about. And I think when it comes down to business, I've learned that, hey, figure out what your clients care about and then provide what they care about. Now, if I come across a lawyer, and I've done this, and this has happened many times, where I come across a lawyer where the lawyer has personal objectives and personal goals and moral standards that don't align with mine, I'm just going to choose not to do business with them. But I would say is I'm not going in saying, well, hey, I want you to pay me to be my authentic self. And I'm like, they
No,
don't care
never go.
about
Yeah,
paying
they
you to
don't
be
care.
your authentic self. They care about paying you to help them solve a problem. Now, I do believe that once you start solving that problem, what will end up happening is that more of, who you are, how you operate will come out. And all that's going to do is it's going to help cement the relationship and make the relationship a lot better. But if your focus is, I want them to pay me to be my authentic self, I'm like, you're going to be losing a lot because they care more about their problems than they do about your identity.
So mostly what I've seen is they focus more on messaging, doing sales, but marketing is something that gets left behind because either they don't have a time, they are solopreneur, there are too many things on their plate. So how do they balance it? What marketing channels should they focus on early on when they are starting?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes down to the marketing channels they should focus on, I think first you have to understand is you have a limited amount of time. And there are a ton of ways for you to market. I mean, you can market in person, there's billboards, there's print, there's television, radio, there's social media, and there's a ton of different social media platforms. So I think the first thing you want to do is really figure out, okay, all right, who do I want to talk to? And where is the most likely place that those people show up? And I think that if you start to prioritize it, like for us, when we looked at law firms, what we realized is, the first place that we can probably speak to a lot of law firms is with bar associations. And so what we started doing is figuring out how can we get a presence within bar associations. And then, we kind of leveraged into, our using our social media in connection with these bar associations, because we're like, every lawyer has to be a member of a state bar association. So if we can really develop 100% of lawyers are part of a bar of association. Now, I can say when you look at social media, 100% of lawyers are not on social media. So we realize while social media is very, very effective, the highest kind of success rate would probably get us if we went with the bar associations first. And I think by, being part of some of the bar associations, we could, be privy to some of those conversations. And that's how we started to learn about our audience. So when we did start using, law firm content on social media, we can do it in a way that we already knew was relevant. And then that can just help. And then we kind of looked at, hey, how do we add email marketing on? And then like we started just adding, and then now we're getting to that phase where it's like, okay, how do we add paid media or paid ad spend on top of what we already did? And I would say for anyone who's just starting off is figure out like, who do you want to talk to? And then figure out, okay, where is the most likely place that you are going to run into them? And start with that medium first. Start with that method of marketing first, and then start to add other things as they make sense.
If a person wants to, he's just starting a firm, and
Mm-hmm.
the number he has in mind is $1 million revenue firm
Mm-hmm.
in, let's say, in next 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
How does he proceed? How does he proceed? Because
Yeah.
we
So
have an goal in mind. Yeah.
the very first thing I would say is I would ask that entrepreneur, okay, why is $1 million important to you? And whatever that answer may be. And some people say, man, it sounds like a cool number. I'm like, okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
I, I don't really care what the answer is. I just want you to be
Why?
honest with yourself about
Yeah.
what it is. So after they answer that question, then I would say, let's do some math. $1 million divided by what is your average price per customer? and we can then kind of back into how many customers are you going to need. So if a person comes to me and says, I want to build a $1 million business and my average price is, let's say, $600 a month for, per client, then I'm going to say, all right, let's just do the math. The 600, if we look at that on an annual basis, how many clients do you need to hit 1 million? And what I always find is people who tell me they have like this big goal that they want to hit. When we do the math and then I say, okay, all right, in order for that to work, you need X number of customers. Are you okay with that? And a lot of times they're like, that's a lot of
Lot.
customers.
Yeah.
And then because I think from there, it's really a strategy of like, once we know how many customers you're going to need, then we can kind of ask ourselves, okay, all right, is this a volume problem? Meaning we got to do a ton of marketing and sales to get you a ton of customers. Or is this a pricing problem? Meaning you need to find a way to raise your prices, or you need to find a
Upsell. Yeah.
service that allows you to come in with a higher price. And sometimes it's a combination of both. And so as we kind of look at doing that math, and this is before we even get out there and start selling, is because before you start doing marketing, before you start doing sales, we need to know what our target is. And so if you tell me you want to have a $1 million business, let's just do the math. How many clients does that need? So let's say, for example, we did the math and based on the pricing, this person said, well, we need 100 clients to get to $1 million a year. Okay, cool. Now, if you want to do that over the next 5 years, how many customers do we need in year one? Let's say we get, 20 customers in year one. Okay. The reality is some of those customers are going to leave when you go into
Yeah.
year two. So let's say if 5 of those customers leave, what does your goal need to look like for year two to be able to say, hey, I'm still on track to get to $1 million? And I think a lot of times, firm owners, they just don't do the basic math to really calculate it. It's just from year to year, they're like, I want to be $1 million firm. And they just go out and do a bunch of stuff. And I'm just like, we need to actually have a plan. As accountants, we should be good at just doing the basic math. This is adding, subtracting, multiplying, and maybe there's some division in there. But I'm like, this is basic mathematical arithmetic. We need to do the math to say, how many customers is it going to take? And then, okay, do we need to raise our prices, or do we need to figure out a way to make this more scalable? Because once you start looking at, I believe once you go over 15 clients, you really need to look and ask yourself, all right, do you have scalable processes? Because when you get to around 15 clients, at that point, you can kind of tell like whether your processes are scalable or not, because you would have enough experience to know like, hey, do you have good processes? If you added more clients, would you be able to handle it? And I think once you start really asking yourselves some, challenging questions like that, I think you need to fix those things before you try to just scale up to, hitting whatever goal it is making sure that one is you understand what your goal is, how many clients it's going to take to get there, and do you have the processes that allow you to support that? Because where I've seen a lot of people struggle is they get to around, maybe when they get to probably around like 20,000 a month in, recurring revenue, they kind of get stuck. And some of that is they either have bad processes or they stop marketing and selling to bring in new clients, because now they're just focused on how do I take care of the 20 clients that I have? And I'm like, that's not going to get you to $1 million. You're going to have to do a little bit of both. You can't stop marketing and selling.
Interesting. Coming to an industry perspective, right? So recently Trump got elected. So what are your views? How he is going to affect the accounting industry?
Yeah, I think he's going to be a huge help to the accounting industry. And I'm not necessarily believing that, hey, he intentionally has a love for the accounting industry. I don't necessarily see it that way. I just think the reality of the way that he operates, like there's a lot of uncertainty. Well, when the market is uncertain, that's when accountants have an opportunity to shine. And I say that as a person who, I started my first job in, during 2007, 2008, during the financial, the housing crisis where, we had hundreds of banks that were, going bankrupt during that
Yeah.
time. It was a lot of uncertainty. But what I learned during that time is the people who can actually look at the numbers and actually say, okay, all right, based on our numbers, here's what we're projecting. Because I think the numbers and having a good grasp on the numbers help you navigate uncertain times. And so I think for the accounting industry, it's a great opportunity for us to take what we know about the numbers and use that to have productive conversations with our counterparts or with our clients. So I think because of the uncertainty that has, come with, the early days of the Trump administration in the US, like it creates a huge opportunity because everybody is looking for they're looking for someone who can stand up with some sense of awareness and say, hey, based on what I'm seeing, I think here are some of our options and here's how I'm suggesting we move forward. Because when there is uncertainty, that's where you really find out who are the real leaders, who are the people who can really, wrestle with the uncertainty, but provide some sense of clarity or some sense of a path forward for others. Because when you can do that in an uncertain time, that's when you become more valuable to the people around you. And I think
100%.
that is a great opportunity for the accounting industry. The question is, are they going to be willing to actually be the person who steps into the uncertainty and provides some sense of clarity?
Point of discussion that I have seen generally going around in the industry of talent shortage. Ki young people are not entering the CPA. They are not entering the public accounting field. They're mostly going the big fours and MNCs and corporate. So, what do you think about this? What are your perspective? And have you faced this problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it is a problem that I think the accounting industry created themselves. I think part of it is because accountants are typically horrible at marketing. We've contributed to this problem. I mean, no one's going to go into a career that they're not very aware of. Like even for myself, like I probably would not have gone into accounting had it not been for taking some accounting classes in high school. Like that's what really sparked my attention. And I do think that the accounting profession is a great opportunity for people to really, develop the exposure that they need to business while at the same time building a profitable career path that whether it stays a career path indefinitely or whether you eventually go the route of being an entrepreneur. I think that the accounting profession has not done a really good job of marketing how versatile the accounting profession is and how essential accounting is to so many different areas of business and so many different areas of life. So I do think the accounting profession will have to get better at branding and marketing. We definitely have to let people know, what the opportunity looks like. The other thing is, I think we need to change the way we've been doing things. Like I came up and, I started in public accounting as well. And the way we did things in public accounting, it was pretty awful. Just, the way that we went about doing the work. And, for me, the big thing was you get to the end of an audit, you get to an end of a project and you always kind of left asking yourself, was it even worth it? Like we just
Yeah.
worked all of these hours. What was the end product? And oftentimes I think, and this is something very simple, like within big four accounting firms, there is very little to no celebration of the completion of an audit. Like you
100%.
put a ton of effort and
Yeah.
hard work into doing this audit. And then when you're done, it's like, okay, off to the next one. And I'm like, we just completed a very, very important project. And that's one of the things that I valued when I started working for, Fortune 500 companies and corporations is when we got finished with a major project, we kind of celebrated it. And in that way, people felt like, man, those late nights that we put in, it was worth it because this is what we achieved. And I find it so interesting that even after going through an audit in public accounting, like very few members of public accounting actually go back and read the financial statements that they
Yeah.
just produced. And so I think that we got to do a better job in the profession of, if we're going to ask people to really, grind and put in all of this hard work, how do we as leaders and participants, how do we start to celebrate when we get to the end of it? Because I mean, I learned it, after I had left public accounting and went to work for different corporations, when I worked in investor relations, and part of my job was to get on the phone with Wall Street analysts and having those conversations with institutional investors. And it wasn't until that point in my career that I realized, wow, all of that stuff that I used to do in public accounting, it was for this. This is the end product. So these types of conversations could happen. And when I'm talking to an institutional investor who's trying to decide whether they're going to move $50 billion into the stock or not, like, this is why we did all that work in audit. And I realized that public accounting firms, they don't do a good job of really celebrating the hard work or letting people know, like, hey, here's why you're working so hard. Here's what we're supporting. And I think you can do it easily by, let's say if you were on an audit and let's say you audited a company. Well, when they do their quarterly analyst report or their quarterly earnings report, listen to it as a team. Or
No
if
one does
you're the
it.
partner or
Yeah.
you're the senior manager, like, hey, I just want you guys to know, like, hey, here are 3 things that the CEO said. This is what we supported. Like, they said that because of all the work that we did. And I think when you start to connect those dots, I think people can start to have, better things to say about the profession. And I think that just goes back to like a, marketing and kind of like really branding strategy. Because I will say, the first public accounting firm that holds a watch party for like a earnings report for an audit team, I think that one is going to like win big when it
Yeah,
comes
yeah,
down
yeah,
to
yeah.
recruits.
Even we never celebrated. I feel that it's so real, and that was one of the reason I left that, because we used to stay awake till night. The work was done, but the next day again to next project. There was no like,
Yep.
when we finish a task, we get the dopamine hit, right, by celebrating that. That never happens.
Absolutely. I mean, because I think you can do some things that are really fun, because I think about a public accounting firm that audits, publicly traded companies. So the end product is very public, to where even if, let's say, in the firm, if you did a game show, to where like in America, Family Feud is a big thing, to
Yeah,
where
yeah,
you
yeah, I
take
know.
the audit team from one company versus the audit team from another company, and you do some type of game to make it fun, to really celebrate, like, hey, here's why we're working so hard. And I think what it does is it'll give the teams a chance to bond together and have some fun, and you can see the end product. Or even if it was to the sense of just allowing like some of the audit team to meet some of the investors who actually invest in these companies, so they can start to grasp, like, hey, the audit you are doing help these people make
Yeah.
smart decisions about their investment strategy. And I think when you can start to make the work more meaningful, I think you can start to, bridge that gap and start to heal the, I guess you say, the talent gap, because then auditing and public accounting tends to look, more appealing, because you're really helping people celebrate the value of what they're doing.
Have you tried playing that game in your teams? Have you tried that? Have you seen someone trying?
So what we are doing is we're doing a retreat. I'm flying over to at the last week, well, the 3rd week of April. My wife and I are flying out to the Philippines, and we're bringing our whole team together. We're gonna do some activities and really focus on, like, hey, here's some of the success stories that our clients have been having. Like, one of the big things, like an internal goal for us, is we want to help our clients grow their net profit by at least 7% or more year over year. And so internally, we look at that and we track. Like we get together, we put like, hey, here are our clients, here's who's growing, and hey, here's how we help our clients grow. And I think as we kind of get in that mode of celebrating, when our clients are experiencing victories, like we celebrate because we see ourselves as part of their team. Like we help them. Like there was one client that before they came to us, they're struggling with their strategy, and 1 year they had lost over $500,000 in losses. Well, after a year of working with us, they completely turned that around to where, last year they made about, 20,000 in net profit. And people may say, well, that's not much. But I'm like, they went from losing 500,000 to making 20,000. Now they're on track to really just scale their profitability. And I'm like, for us as a team, like we're excited about that because we're like, we help them avoid losing
Yeah.
$500,000 and help them get on the right track. And so we try to really, celebrate the wins of our client to really help our team understand like, hey, we're a part of something big, and what we're doing is important. And so people are excited to be part of our team.
Versus like as you said, key audit team one versus two. So we did the same, but we did in some
Mhm.
different format and with a different angle. So versus format in general works on YouTube. If you do anything versus in YouTube, it's going to get views. So I've seen that so many, like Mr. Beast has also done sometimes a versus series. So we thought of doing that, but giving a finance spin, and that to giving an India spin, so that the India context comes into a picture. So what we did was
Mhm.
we got two CEOs versus two IAS officers that are the top positions in government. So it's like two
Okay.
private government officials versus two private professionals officers, that is CEOs. And so it was like IAS versus CEOs, and we made them discuss about things, stuffs, and economy. And that was our first 1 million hit when we started our channel. So when you said versus, that really hit my mind. Yeah, that is something that interesting we can do. What I have seen is, I mean, I may be wrong in this, and please don't hold me to the numbers. The demand, that the scare demand that is there because of the lack of talent shortage, is much lesser compared to the talent pool that is being developed in eastern countries to serve the western countries, because the
Yep.
outsourcing industry is getting so big. Although there is a unfulfilled demand here, but the talent pool here is getting too big, but still they are not serving because somewhere quality is not matching, or somewhere some like they are not trusting them, or some security issues. So what do you think about this? How it is going to be in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is spot on with what I'm seeing as well. Is that yes, while there is a decreasing talent pool in the U.S., the offshore and talent is dramatically increasing, because I think that we finally gotten to the point where the technology is at a place where people are comfortable enough to start using offshore talent more. I mean, back when, like I said, I worked for, some of the world's largest companies when I was working in corporate. And back then, those companies were comfortable doing it. Like, I remember this is what now, like what, almost 13 years ago, when we were offshoring accounting roles to India, to Malaysia, down in South America. Like I was part of a team that was, managing that 13 years ago. So now I think, your accounting firms and your smaller firms are starting to really look at that as a viable option, and they're getting more comfortable with it. I think over the next 10 years, the offshore market is just going to continue to grow because, again, I mean, I think that the shortage we're experiencing here in America is because accountants are horrible at marketing and branding the profession. And unfortunately, I don't see them changing that. And I don't see them really being honest enough with themselves to make it better within the next 10 years. So I think the natural reaction is people's fear about using offshore staff is going to go down, and then offshore talent in India, in the Philippines, in South America, and even eventually talent in Africa are going to start filling the gap for that, because We're not going to, I doubt we are going to make the necessary change that we need in the US to close that gap. And I don't think that technology is going to completely replace, the use of humans in the accounting process. Because I do think that as the rules change and as circumstances change, yes, we'll be able to train AI to do a lot of things. But I think what you're going to end up having is you're going to end up having offshore staff with AI cooperating with kind of US presence to really, provide the accounting and finance function for organizations.
100%. I remember, so I meditate a lot. I remember one day in the morning, I finished and half an hour of meditation, and I was thinking about this. Ki why is it happening that the talent pool is being developed in Eastern countries to serve the West, although West is not ready to move into the accounting. And after a lot of contemplation, what I was able to realize is, so once the money comes, right? If you see, so many Eastern countries are still poor, right? So when you don't have money, the option you have is the best option, right? But when you
Mm.
have the money, then you have the choices to make, and then you will make the best choice. And that is what I'm seeing, the change that is generally happening in the US, so that they are getting better options because of AI, and multiple industries are opening up. So when it comes to an option, accounting is not the best or first option they have. But when you see the Philippines, when you see Bangladesh, when you see Pakistan, when you see India, or like specifically tier 2 cities of the India, they're like, we need anything, give us the work, we'll work the best,
Mm-hmm.
but we need money. And that is why
Mm-hmm.
the shift is happening so suddenly. And on the talent shortage part, it's not only in the US, even India is facing it. I remember I used to telling you, we do, our CA enrollments are reducing, educational institutes are shutting down because not so many CAs are enrolling into it. So I feel the problem is with the accounting professionals worldwide, because again, as you mentioned, not enough focus on marketing and strategies. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
coming to the
Absolutely.
again, outsourcing and AI, short term outsourcing and long term AI. What do you think about it? How AI is going to change the accounting industry? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it depends on how you look at accounting. Now, I would say when it comes down to public accounting and auditing and stuff like that, I think long term AI can replace a lot of what we do in audit. But I think where you're definitely going to still need the human is I think is really the relation factor, like the influencing factor, because yes, an AI can read the numbers and give you a recommendation,
Mm.
but it can't really manage the human emotions
Yeah, yeah.
that translate that recommendation or that advice into something that is influential to really guide them in making a decision. And I think one very clear example of that is like so many people in America, either have a cell phone or they have these smart watches. And these smartwatches are constantly going off telling people, hey, you need to get up and walk around. And people still
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
do it. So it's like
Same.
the tool
I've
can,
seen it.
the tool and the AI can give you the recommendation. But if you don't master the art of really motivating you to actually take the action, then I think that the AI can only do so much. And the AI it'll be great at information gathering. It can be great at information kind of recapture, and it can be great at giving you information, but really giving and coming with the influence that will lead you to actually take action and to be accountable. I think that human element of the accounting profession will become more and more important. Because I mean, I think about, the difference between, hey, your watch, you can program your watch or your cell phone to be your physical fitness trainer, but they're not going to get the same results as working out with an actual person who's your fitness trainer. And so I think what you're going to end up with is, in that same analogy, you're going to end up with fitness trainers who are using AI to enhance the advice and the recommendations that they're giving. And same thing with accounting, is you're going to end up with accountants who are using AI to help them become better at relaying and influencing the business decisions as it pertains to accounting.
Percent. And what happens because of this is key the number of employees required reduces drastically, right? So since we have started using all the AI tools, right? We were going to hire data analyst, but we didn't. I was going to hire a junior content strategist who can help, but I know my custom GPT can do better work, and that is the reason we are not
Yeah.
hiring. And
Well,
mm,
well, I would say to that, I would also challenge that in many cases, I think what we're experiencing right now is in the past, we overhired. I mean, because
yeah,
I remember, I mean, like even 13 years ago, when I was looking at processes, even back before, I mean, AI wasn't doing then what it is now. But even then, I would look at some of the things like we were hiring people for basic things that we could already do in Excel. And I think it's just now with AI, it's not that AI is eliminating, I don't look at it as AI is eliminating jobs. It's AI is eliminating the excuses that we used to make, because I do think that unfortunately, especially like in public accounting or even in corporations, the older model of leadership was always, oh, just hire another person,
yeah,
throw
yeah,
more
100%,
bodies at
yeah,
it. When I'm like, no, we need to fix the process. And I think what AI is doing is AI is taking away the excuses that we have for keeping bad processes. AI is allowing us to fix the processes that we probably should have fixed 10 years ago. and
yep,
and I think that as a result of us getting those processes fixed, people are saying like, well, AI is taking jobs. I'm like, no, AI is just helping us do what we always should have done. I mean, like we should have had a better process on, being able to draft emails or messages. Like we should have been better at what we are doing. Like where I've seen organizations where they need to draft communication and send it out to clients. And because their processes were bad, they hired a person whose job was solely dedicated to doing that. And I'm like, that's not, I mean, you didn't really need to hire that person. It's just you didn't want to fix your processes. So you inadvertently
mm,
hired this person. Now that you're using AI, you're saying AI took this person's job. I'm like, no, AI is just helping you do what you should have been doing this entire time, which is
100%.
fixing your processes, making them more efficient.
100%. Really interesting. Coming to the last question of this podcast, if you would have to start your everything like your firm again, how would you do it differently this time?
Yeah, so if I had to start over again, I would say that the first thing I would do is I would lean much harder into marketing, because I realized that, once I started getting clients, I actually slowed down on my marketing and I focused on doing the technical work of accounting. And so, probably what I would have done is I would have stayed focused on continuing to go harder in marketing. And I probably would have just hired staff earlier so that they could do the work and I could focus on continuing to market. And because we would have grown faster, because I think a lot of companies go through that phase where, they start off, they get some customers, and then once they get to a certain point, and that's why I say like around 15 clients, we got to around 15 clients, and I stopped doing sales and marketing as much because then I was focused on doing the day-to-day accounting work. I probably, if going back and doing it again, I would have just taken a smaller salary and just hired more people to do the work so that I can focus on marketing and sales, and we probably would have continued growing at a faster rate.
Interesting. Nice. Yeah. So that was it. I really enjoyed. I don't even know when 1.5 hours went. It was really nice. It was really nice talking with you. Thank you so much.
Hey,
Yeah.
thank you for having me.